Every empire believed it had escaped history. They believed their armies were too strong, their gods too powerful, their wealth too vast. Rome believed it. Egypt believed it. Persia believed it. China believed it, and every one of them collapsed, not suddenly, not dramatically, but quietly, long before the first wall fell. As a financial historian, there is one truth history keeps repeating century after century. Empires do not fall when enemies arrive. They fall when the numbers stop working. The battlefield only delivers the final blow. The real death happens in the treasury. This is the part history textbooks rush past. Because financial collapse is not cinematic. It is slow, boring, invisible. And that is why it is so dangerous. Long before Rome burned, it was already bankrupt. Long before Egypt weakened, its economy was breaking. Long before great dynasties vanished, their financial systems were rotting. Ancient people understood something we often forget: money is not power. Trust in money is power. And once that trust breaks, no empire survives. In the earliest civilizations, Mesopotamia, Sumer, Babylon, rulers feared one thing more than invasion: debt. Debt was not an abstract concept. It was chains. Farmers borrowed seed grain to survive bad harvests. Merchants borrowed silver to fund trade. When crops failed or ships sank, repayment became impossible. And debt did not end with bankruptcy. It ended with families being sold, children taken, land seized. Entire societies began collapsing from inside. So ancient kings did something modern people find shocking. They erased all debt. These were known as debt cancellations or jubilees, not because rulers were kind, but because they were realistic. They understood a brutal truth. When debt grows faster than production, civilization breaks. Ignore this, and society tears itself apart. Every empire that forgot this lesson paid for it later. As empires expanded, wealth flooded in. Gold from conquered lands, silver from tribute, grain from taxes. At first, everything looked perfect. Roads were built. Armies grew. Monuments rose. But expansion creates addiction. Each new territory increased costs: more soldiers to pay, more borders to defend, more officials to feed. Eventually, conquest stopped being profitable. This was the moment empires never planned for. When income stopped growing, but expenses did not. This is where financial collapse truly began. Rome faced this reality earlier than most. Once expansion slowed, the Roman state had only three options: raise taxes, borrow money, or manipulate the currency. They did all three. Taxes rose until farmers abandoned land. Borrowing increased until elites lost trust. And then came the most dangerous choice of all. They debased the currency. Roman coins once contained real silver. Slowly, quietly, emperors reduced that silver. The coins looked the same. The law declared them equal. But merchants noticed. Prices rose. Savings lost value. Trade slowed. Inflation existed long before the word did. And once it began, it could not be stopped. This pattern repeated everywhere. In ancient China, rulers printed money to cover military costs. In Egypt, grain taxes crushed farmers. In Persia, war spending drained treasuries. Different cultures. Same financial disease. Empires believed they could command value by decree. They were wrong. You cannot order people to trust money that no longer represents real wealth. Once people lose confidence, they hoard gold, land, and goods. The economy freezes. This is the stage where collapse becomes inevitable. Heavy taxation always followed. When rulers could no longer fund the state through growth, they turned to force. Tax collectors became feared. Peasants fled villages. Production collapsed. Governments responded by raising taxes even more. This feedback loop destroyed economies faster than any invading army. Because wealth is created by people, not palaces. And once people stop producing, the state starves. As a historian, this is the most uncomfortable truth. The cost of maintaining empire always exceeds its benefit in the end. Armies become defensive instead of expansionist. Borders drain resources instead of generating wealth. Administration grows bloated and corrupt. By the time leaders realize this, it is already too late. The system is running on borrowed time and borrowed money, and this is where the most important stage begins. The final stage, the loss of trust. When soldiers demand payment in land instead of coins, when merchants hide wealth, when citizens lose faith in the future, collapse no longer needs an enemy. It happens on its own. History does not change its rules. It only changes the names. And the ancient world learned this lesson the hard way. Once trust begins to disappear, an empire enters its most dangerous phase. From the outside, everything still looks strong. Flags still fly. Armies still march. Laws are still enforced. But inside, the financial heart has stopped beating. This is the stage where history becomes brutally consistent. As confidence in money faded, ancient people changed their behavior. They stopped investing in the future. They stopped improving land. They stopped taking risks. Why build a farm if taxes will take it? Why trade if money loses value? Why save if savings dissolve? Economic activity slowed to a crawl, and when production collapses, states lose their lifeline. No taxes, no soldiers, no stability. Rome experienced this in its final centuries. Small farmers disappeared, replaced by massive estates owned by elites. These estates paid fewer taxes, while peasants carried the burden. Wealth concentrated upward. The state tried to compensate by squeezing those who remained. This only accelerated collapse. Entire regions became economically dead long before political control vanished. The empire still existed on maps, but not in reality. This pattern was not unique to Rome. In ancient China, dynasties repeatedly fell after the same sequence. War demanded money. Money creation caused inflation. Inflation destroyed trust. Trust collapse destroyed trade. Rebellions followed, not because people wanted chaos, but because the system no longer worked. Hunger is not ideological, it is financial. Ancient rulers responded the only way they knew how. They blamed enemies. They blamed merchants. They blamed minorities. But they never blamed the system itself. Instead of reducing costs, they expanded bureaucracy. Instead of restoring sound money, they forced acceptance. Instead of rebuilding trust, they used violence. History shows this never works. You can force obedience. You cannot force confidence. Gold and silver mattered because they limited power. They could not be created by command. They forced discipline. When empires abandoned real money, they abandoned restraint. Markets collapsed into barter. Trade routes disappeared. Cities shrank. Financial collapse does not just end empires. It reverses civilization. War delivered the final blow, but war was never the cause. By the time invaders arrived, treasuries were empty. Soldiers were unpaid. Walls were neglected. Loyalty was gone. Many armies surrendered not because they were defeated, but because they were starving. Collapse looked sudden to outsiders. To those inside the system, it had been unfolding for generations. This is the great illusion of history. We remember the fall. We forget the decay. Ruins do not show tax records. Broken columns do not reveal inflation rates. Burned cities hide decades of financial mismanagement. But the pattern is unmistakable. As a financial historian, one conclusion is unavoidable. Ancient empires collapsed not from a lack of strength, but from an excess of obligations. They promised more than they could deliver. They spent future wealth to sustain present power. And eventually, the future arrived. Every empire reached the same moment, the moment when leaders had to choose between cutting power or destroying the economy. They chose power. Every time, the final stage was always psychological. People stopped believing tomorrow would be better than today. Once that belief dies, no policy can revive it. Currency reforms failed. New laws failed. New rulers failed. Because trust cannot be legislated, it must be earned. And ancient empires had already spent it. History does not punish ambition. It punishes imbalance. When spending outpaces production, collapse becomes mathematical, not moral, not political, inevitable. The ancient world left us ruins as warnings, not warnings about enemies, not warnings about rebellion, warnings about numbers, about debt, about money, about trust. And the most uncomfortable lesson of all civilizations do not fall because they are attacked. They fall because they consume themselves. The ruins we admire today were not destroyed in a single moment. They were destroyed one financial decision at a time.